Well, that was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today, celebrating a major victory. The Supreme Court of Canada unanimously upheld the federal Indigenous child welfare law. It had been passed by the Liberal government in 2019. Today, the court ruled it is constitutional and that Indigenous communities do have ultimate jurisdiction over child welfare services. Quebec had challenged the law, arguing it infringed on provincial jurisdiction, something the court rejected today. I spoke with Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse following the victory. And joining us now is Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse. Thank you so much for being here, Chief Woodhouse.
Thanks for having me.
National Chief, you've said that this is a significant step forward, but how did this delay affect communities that are actually taking steps to self-determination?
Well, certainly there's probably over 90 First Nations now that have been taking steps to take back jurisdiction of their children, to bring their children home to their communities, to find a different way of child welfare in this country. As you know, other governments have always told First Nations what to do, and First Nations have not had a big role in developing their own laws, and they're starting to take back our own laws once again and to try and bring our children home once again, that children can thrive in our communities and thrive amongst our people with our languages, with our culture. And so today is a good day. We lift up the Supreme Court. I know it's presented an opportunity for full recognition and affirmation of First Nations inherent rights over child and family matters, as well as the exercise of the jurisdiction at the highest levels of Canada. So we lift them up for that. We're pleased with it.
Now, the federal government has provided funding in certain areas to Indigenous communities. So how did this delay affect that funding?
You know, we've been working, we've been negotiating for some time, and we have to continue to work. I know that there's things that have not been ironed out yet that we're still at the table with trying to work through on different parts of child welfare, and we're still at the table, we're still talking. We look forward to talking, we look forward to trying to find a final settlement agreement with the federal government on child welfare soon in the months ahead. But we need to be at the table talking with each other rather than through courts and through, when provinces challenge the jurisdictions, provinces and territories challenge the jurisdiction of First Nations people. That's not a good way to start. And I call on the federal government, the provincial government, and particularly the Prime Minister. I know this week we've seen progress in BC. Things are changing in this country. I think today's another new day, another good day for First Nations. I see progress of Premier Ebby here in the Lands Act. I see Wab Kinew as a First Nations first Premier in Manitoba, very proud of him. We also see the Conservatives yesterday announcing First Nations policies on economic development. And then we see this ruling, of course, today, and I know that it's time for the feds to keep going on the federal budget. They've been very well financially, fiscally towards First Nations. We need to continue to see that because the gaps are so huge in this country, including in child welfare. And I know that, we look to the Prime Minister to hopefully call a First Ministers meeting to bring everybody together and to talk about what this means, but also other issues that need to be addressed in our country.
There are communities like Opichewan, which is in Quebec, which have begun the process of taking control of child protection. What does that look like, and what can other communities learn from them?
You know what? I think anytime that there's other issues, and other Canadians, for instance, but in First Nations communities, they always take our children out, away from us, to people that speak different languages than us. Putting this back into the hands of First Nations people, I grew up on a First Nation community. I'm so glad for that. And many other people that I know were so happy for that. Why? Because we have access, and growing up within our families, we have access to our language. We have access to our ways of life. We have spirituality that we're raised with right from birth. And many of our kids, when they're raised in other places, they know they don't belong there, and they come out of these systems and they're broken at the age of majority, and then there's nothing for them after that. They're kicked out on the street. They're disconnected from our First Nations communities. They're disconnected from their families, and it creates it creates a really broken system in this country, and then they're left out on the street and they have nowhere to go. And so we need to stop the bleeding of that and give our families support once again and work together in a good way in this country. And I'm so thankful for that. I look forward to those discussions with all people in Canada.
Mm-hmm. When you became national chief of the AFN, you said that you'd push the government on its commitment to close the infrastructure gap in Indigenous communities before 2030. Now, when you met with the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland earlier this week ahead of the upcoming budget, did you get any assurances that that will be happening either in this upcoming budget or soon thereafter?
I certainly hope so. I mean, we've pushed that we can. Assembly of First Nations, we've put a pre-budget submission in. We have been meeting minister after minister. We've not only met with Chrystia, we've met with opposition parties, we've met with opposition leaders, Jagmeet Singh, Pierre. We've met with, just different ministries within the government of Canada to talk about our priorities. And we have many priorities. We don't have a shortage of that. And it's because the gaps have been so huge for so long. There is a commitment to close the infrastructure and housing gap to 2030. We want to remind Canada that they've had that commitment, that it's important that we're not left out of the federal budget, and we're here to work in a good way. We've also, on policing, for instance, I know that the provinces, this is another way that we can all work together in a good way. The provinces and the federal government and the territorial governments need to come together to begin a new discussion on policing. There's so much to talk about because talks have been left for far too long. First Nations have been waiting a long time, and we're here, we're ready, and we're ready to get to work.
I wanted to ask you, because Minister Freeland has essentially said that they are going into a period, not to say of austerity, but really that they are trying to make sure that they're looking for efficiencies in government and other places. Are you worried that Indigenous services or money for Indigenous communities will be a victim of that type of belief when that budget comes out?
I think that's wrong if they're thinking that, and I have to look back at former prime ministers like, I remember, I think it was Paul Martin at the time, and another one was John Chrétien at the time, and there was another prime minister. When they did do cuts, it wasn't on First Nations people because, like I said, the gaps are so huge, and it wasn't on health, the healthcare of Canadians. Mm-hmm. So I think if you can find other places to cut and leave those, the health in the first health, number one for all Canadians, and First Nations alone, find other things and find other ways, but not on the backs of people that are already suffering and services that are so needed for this country.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.